Well, I can see by the comments that the comments section for the live video doesn't seem to be working, or people are having trouble with it, but that you could actually see what I was saying. So I'm going to continue with chapter 2, Why Oracles Work, the 7 Secrets of Fortune Telling. The epigram is, it's only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And that was a cute little quote from The Little Prince. I know 7 secrets sound overly dramatic and corny, but it just so happens that 6 weren't enough and 8 were too many. When the subject is mystical powers, things just work out that way. Secret number 1. Psychic power? You're full of it. Many believe that only certain people have fortune-telling power. I personally believe that everyone is psychic. Some are just more in touch with their psychic ability than others. I haven't always felt that way. As a young occultist, I was perfectly satisfied to consider myself the most unpsychic person on earth. A strange little episode in 1974 involving an ill-conceived practical joke forced me to rethink that attitude. It started quite innocently while reading tarot cards as a way of regularly earning a good meal for the 3 DuQuettes at the home of a wealthy acquaintance. Every Sunday, our gracious hostess threw a dinner party at her home at the marina. She invited a broad spectrum of local yogis, Rosicrucians, witches, theosophists, spoonbenders, and various other aspiring wizards and New Age mystic posers. Each Sunday, after enjoying a wonderful dinner and a breath of sea air, I sang for our supper by reading the fortunes of the stuffed and wine-addled dilettantes. I used the Crowley-Harris Thoth Tarot, which in those days lent me a certain air of satanic mystery. Even in those days, however, I projected such an image of banal harmlessness that nobody felt too uneasy. In fact, I think most of them secretly enjoyed their weekly brush with the dark side. As far as reading cards was concerned, I didn't have the slightest idea what I was doing. The cards more or less just read themselves. I just laid them out on the dining room table and started talking. I certainly didn't feel that I was tapping into anything more mysterious than carbohydrates and caffeine. What little I knew about the individual cards was enough to start me blathering, then mindless free association took over. I was amazed to see how the thoughtless bits of babbling that dropped from my lips evoked such looks of surprise and wonder from my querents. More often than not, things that made no sense to me made a lot of sense to my belching clients. At first it was fun, but after a few weeks, things took an uncomfortable turn. Daphne, an attractive woman in her late 20s, and the most devoted of the Sunday regulars. She was a kind of true believer that spiritual con men pray for and prey upon. She was addicted to psychic readings and spent far too much of her time and money getting her aura fluffed and seeking astrological and psychic counseling on every aspect of her life. Our Sunday salon was just one more stop on her weekly quest for someone strange and mysterious to tell her what to think. From the first just for fun tarot reading I gave her, she was totally convinced of my magical omnipotence and psychic omniscience. The more I denied it, the more she raised her eyebrows and cooed to the others in the room, "Ooh, all the really heavy psychics deny it." To make matters worse, no matter how hard I tried to give her silly and stupid readings, they still turned out to be, according to Daphne, profoundly accurate. Each week, I dug myself deeper and deeper into the pit of this poor woman's delusional projections. I finally decided that for her own good, I would do something about it. The day before the next gathering, my wife Constance and I took a long walk together and we hatched a plot. A terrible and sophomoric prank that we believed would surely bring Daphne to her senses. And our plan was this. The next day, before the group sat down to dinner, I would take Daphne aside and tell her that I had a dream about her. Then I would tell her a story so preposterously silly that she and everyone else who might be listening would soon realize that I was joking. Theoretically, after we all had a big laugh, I'd be able to convince Daphne that I was not the psychic guru she was looking for, and that it was very unwise for her to rely too heavily upon the advice and motives of strangers. By the time Constance and I returned from our walk, we were laughing so hard we were in tears. We concocted a story that was so outrageously ridiculous, so ludicrous and bizarre. We were positive it would bring Daphne back down to earth. That night, I rehearsed the story over and over so I could tell it with a perfectly straight face. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew timing was going to be important to pull this off. I couldn't let Daphne realize too soon that I was pulling her leg. I'd need a little time to draw her deep into the phony vision before it became obvious that the whole story was an elaborate joke. The next day, the three DuQuettes arrived at the party a few minutes late. I immediately approached Daphne, which itself was unusual because I usually tried to avoid her. "Daphne, could I talk to you for a moment?" Her face contorted in ecstasy as if she was having a psychic orgasm. This was going to be good. Yes, of course. Is there something wrong?" We sat down at opposite ends of the living room couch. "Daphne, last night I had a dream." "No, it was more than a dream." "Do you know what I mean?" "It was more like a vision. It was about you. Not you, Daphne, you, but you. The you that once was you and what it still is, obviously, but isn't. Do you know what I mean?" Each time I asked, "Do you know what I mean?" she wrinkled her brow knowingly and bit her lower lip and nodded her head like a dashboard dog. I continued. "At the beginning of the dream, I felt heat on my face, a sweet heat, very, very hot, but it was a dry heat, a desert heat. Somehow I knew I was in Babylon." Daphne gasped. I had her. I saw a beautiful little girl. I knew it was you. Your name was Miriam, daughter of Gip. Up to this point, everything had gone as planned, and I was having fun. But when Daphne's eyes grew as big as saucers and began to fill with tears, I realized that what I was doing was terribly wrong. What was I thinking? This was a cruel and insensitive prank. It wasn't going to be funny at all. This was a real human being I was toying with, a dear soul with feelings. I actually blushed with shame. Poor Daphne was hanging on every word I said. I stopped the story and looked to Constance to rescue me. She was as paralyzed as I. Searching for words of explanation, an excuse, an apology. Daphne, of course, misinterpreted my humiliated silence as tortured reticence of a sensitive psychic reluctant to reveal a vision of painful past life experience. She moved closer to me on the couch as if to say, "Go on, I could take it." The other guests started to gather around us to listen. I was at a complete loss of words. The only thing I could think of to do was continue with the stupid story and hope for the best. Miriam, daughter of Gip, a Hebrew slave girl in Babylon. You were only 6 years old when your master, a wealthy saffron broker, sold you into service to the priests of the temple of Mabuba, the great Babylonian frog goddess. Because you were born with webbed toes, you were regarded as an incarnation of the goddess. The priests doted on you and showered you with many special privileges. It was there in the gardens of the temple complex that you blossomed into young womanhood. You especially enjoyed buffing the giant lily pads that grew in the cool and tranquil temple ponds, and netting the sacrificial flies that fed the insatiable appetite of the great goddess. Daphne clumsily reached into her purse for a tissue, then wiped the mascara-stained tears from her cheeks. Was she hearing the same things I was saying? I felt like the most evil person on earth. I nervously hurried the story along so I could get to the ridiculous punchline, which by now I assured nobody was going to appreciate. I vowed silently I would never do anything like this to anyone ever again. Poor Daphne was now weeping and sliding demonstrably in and out of spiritual ecstasy. I knew that in just a few moments, when I finally sprung the trap on the poor woman, I was going to be exposed as the biggest bully in the Southern California New Age community. Finally, I neared the end of my stupid story. You died most horribly when the renegade priests of the Temple of Ishtar, jealous of the popularity of the frog goddess, disguised themselves as giant tadpoles and broke into the Mabuba complex, stampeding the thousands of huge and bloated votive frogs. They jammed the exits of the temple and yelled, "Fire! Fire!" Popcorn flew, the film broke, the projector caught fire, the screen went blank, and you and all the daughters of Mabuba were flippered to death. Every last one of you croaked. The room fell silent as a tomb. No one said a word. I laughed nervously and almost shouted, "Everybody croaked!" Silence. Daphne stared at the floor for a moment, nodding her head slightly as if agreeing with some internal voice. She blew her nose with a ladylike little honk, then looked at me with a fragile smile that told me she finally understood where I was coming from. I thought for a moment that maybe this hadn't been such a bad idea after all. I half expected that any second she would break into giggles and of self-realization and thank me for helping her see the light. She took a deep breath and cocked her head to the side, the way people do before they say something they really want you to hear. My name was Miriam. I wasn't sure what she meant by that. The dreamy, glossy-eyed look on her face soon told me exactly what was happening. My name was Miriam, and you're the third psychic to tell me this. First a friend, then a past life reader last week in Santa Cruz. They both saw it. I was born a Hebrew slave in Babylon, but I renounced my religion and became a pagan temple priestess. The other two didn't have the vision to tell me how I died. For that, I thank you. As you spoke, I could actually see myself there. I felt the heat. I smelled the pond. I wanted to scream, "Don't you get it? What about the webbed toes, the sacrificial flies, the tadpole caught, bloated frog stampede, popcorn flying?" But I didn't. I just sat there and surrendered to the possibility that I might be more psychic than I thought. And that maybe, just maybe, Daphne once was Miriam, daughter of Gip, the last priestess of Mabuba. Of course, there's no way of proving whether or not that was a bona fide case of psychic ability or just another one of those synchronicities that from time to time make us scratch our heads and say, "Far out." Perhaps both phenomena are the same thing. In any case, the whole episode served to change my way of looking at the mechanics of psychic abilities and suggested to me that perhaps the key to reading oracles is the ability to become the oracle. To do that, I had to trick myself somehow into stepping out of my own way. I had to learn to train the stupid part of Lon into listening to the wise and all-knowing part of Lon. And that's not always easy, the stupid part being as big as it is. Tomorrow we'll start with secret number 2. You are the oracle. Thank you very much for putting up with a couple false starts and everything else. Again, we're reading the Book of Ordinary Oracles. I'm not sure you saw the first oracle, so I'm going to leave you with a bibliomantic second oracle to take home with you. The oracle for today is it's all about you, isn't it? We'll see you tomorrow. Continue to be good to yourself and good to each other. Do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.